Welcome to our monthly roundtable discussion. My name is Dr. Adityanjee, and I'm the President of the Council for Strategic Affairs. Those of you who registered through Eventbrite probably saw this flyer with pictures of all our distinguished panelists. You will be seeing them live fairly soon. So a little bit about Council for Strategic Affairs. Council imparts education in the field of international relations. CSA fosters discussion, dialogue, and debate on geopolitical issues. Council encourages strategic studies in general to raise the level of awareness. We unequivocally condemn terrorism in all its forms worldwide. CSA aims to contribute towards world peace and prosperity, and the Council promotes people-to-people contact and track to diplomacy. We do have certain monthly activities that include a monthly roundtable discussion, usually held on a second Saturday of each month at 10 a.m. EDT. Today is the third Saturday, but we are having a roundtable discussion. We have a monthly guest lecture by a domain expert on fourth Saturday of each month at 10 a.m. EDT. We have another feature called Strategically Speaking with Dr. Adityanjee, a one-on-one interview. We organize symposia, meetings, and conferences. We promote publications of articles on geopolitics and related subjects. We do have a summer internship program for college students and a fellowship training program in strategic studies. Those of you who want to get in-depth knowledge about our programs, our activities, can go to our website www.councilforstrategicaffairs.org. So the topic for today's discussion is the US a declining superpower? And just to be on record, today is Saturday, July 20th, 2024. We started at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. It is 7:30 p.m. according to Indian Standard Time. And our distinguished panelists include Mr. Arun Ayyagari, Dr. Ramaharitha Pusarla, Professor Madhav Nalapat, and Brigadier Arun Sahgal. All these distinguished panelists have appeared in our programs before, and I will introduce you the panelists. This is Mr. Arun Ayyagari. Arun is an editor and frequently writes on foreign policy and foreign affairs. He's a fellow at American Indo-Pacific Forum, an Indian-American think tank in Washington, D.C. Arun is passionate about international relations. He is an advanced pilot, a commercial pilot, a drone pilot, a first lieutenant in the United States Air Force Auxiliary, an airplane ground instructor, an airplane instrument instructor. He was awarded Chuck Yeager and Benjamin Davis Awards by the U.S. Air Force Auxiliary, graduate of South Brunswick and East Brunswick Citizens Police Academy. He is an active community leader, a certified substitute teacher in state of New Jersey, and teaches various advanced classes in U.S. history, social studies, advanced math in middle school and high school level in New Jersey. He also teaches science, rocket science, and aerospace engineering to the cadets in the United States Air Force, an editor, journalist, campaign consultant, campaign manager, chief political strategist, speechwriter, speaker, and a whole lot of other things. He has a Master's of Science and Master of Arts in Political Science. He has published articles on the CSA website and has appeared in our platforms earlier also. Our next distinguished panelist is Dr. Ramaharitha Pusarla. She is a freelance writer, blogger, and strategic affairs analyst. She obtained a doctorate in life sciences from Center for Cellular and Molecular Biology in Hyderabad, which is currently in Telangana. She worked as a research scientist for SynBios, and then she did a career transition and swiftly transitioned from academic molecular biology research to journalism with a purpose. Over the last 8 to 10 years, she has published articles on international relations, geopolitics, climate change, breakthrough science, sports, travelogue, book reviews, and other contemporary issues. She has authored a book on foreign policy, a commentary on Modi government's unprecedented outreach and its outcomes. She is currently editor-in-chief at My Inmakers, a US-based web portal. And I'm very happy to say that she has appeared in our programs a number of times before. And our next distinguished panelist is Professor Madhav Nalapat. Professor Nalapat is India's first professor of geopolitics who was appointed as early as 1991. And he is amongst the first UNESCO Peace Chairs in India at Manipal University, a position that he continues to hold. He was also editor of Mathrubhumi Daily and subsequently Times of India. He is focused on security and defense. He is author of many books, the last being The Practice of Geopolitics and actually Cold War 2.0. His specialization includes diplomacy, foreign policy, comparative politics, international political economy, international organizations, armed conflict, humanitarian practices, and contemporary world history. He teaches courses related to these subjects and has over 900 publications in these domains. His writings have appeared in journals in US, UK, Australia, Canada, India, on international affairs. He appears regularly on various electronic media platforms, TVs, interviews, webinars, seminars, etc. And he is also the editor of Sunday Guardian. A collection of his writings can be found out on his website. And again, very proud to say that he is, on our platform very often. And our last distinguished panelist is Brigadier Arun Sagal. Brigadier Dr. Arun Sagal is a retired Brigadier of Indian Army. He is the Executive Director at the Forum for Strategic Studies, a policy think tank focusing on national security, diplomacy, and track 2 dialogues. He was previously founding director of Office of the Net Assessments, Indian Integrated Defense Staff, head of Center for Strategic Studies and Simulation at United Services Institute of India and senior fellow at the Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis. He is a member of many Track 1.5 and Track 2 initiatives. And again, I'm very proud to say that he is a mentor, he is a guide, and he is a member of the International Advisory Board of the Council for Strategic Affairs. I turn to him for all kinds of help, and he is always gracious enough. And in fact, even last month, he was in one of our roundtable discussions. I am going to be totally unbiased moderator, so I'm not going to introduce the subject. I will let our distinguished panelists do the talking. Each panelist will get 7 minutes for an opening statement. I would request the panelists to keep to the timeline so that subsequently we have enough time for discussion, because I'm pretty sure this will generate a lot of passion and discussion. So please keep to 7 minutes limit. If you don't, then I will have to intervene. After opening statements, we'll have a round of moderated discussion in which I will ask a couple of questions to the distinguished panelists. And the last phase is when we take questions from the audience. My request to all the audience members are to keep themselves on mute to avoid noise interference. Also change your cell phone to vibration mode. Please do not interrupt our esteemed panelists. Only those members of the audience who identify themselves openly will be allowed to pose questions. So no anonymous questioners, please. No call-in users, one, call-in user two, etc. Please. All the questions are moderated and have to be sent to the chat room. Please be very precise and specific in asking a question. Don't write a lecture in the chat room. This program is being recorded. It is also being live streamed on our YouTube channel as well as on our website. If you go to on our website, we request to support and donate to Council for Strategic Affairs. With that introduction, it is my distinguished privilege and pleasure to invite our first distinguished panelist, Mr. Arun Ayyagari. Arun, the platform is yours. 7 minutes, please. Kindly unmute yourself.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. Good morning, all. Thank you, Dr. Adityanjee, for organizing this and then many series of sessions like these. And thank you all fellow speakers and attendees for attending this event. The topic is U.S. a superpower in decline? That's the topic. So I'll give a little preface to this before I comment, before I give my opinion on this. With over 750 military bases, with rising powers, stable political system, strong GDP per capita, and if my memory serves right, from about 2% of the world's GDP in 1820, way back, to 26% in 2024, 40% of global military spending, which is more than 10 countries combined. That includes China, Russia, India, US, UK, and the likes. The United States continues to manage global affairs. I strongly believe even as of day, it might be declining a little bit, but still a current superpower, current global power, and it's maintaining, it's the keeper of the current global world order. A lot of speakers in many other sessions, I noticed, use the word collapse. They say, is the US a collapsing world order? Collapse is too strong a word. I would like to replace that word collapse or decline with the words like, being challenged, being questioned. It's true, it's a current hegemonic power, and this did not happen overnight. It's been for several decades now. So agreed, deglobalization is a current trend, but I still think US is the keeper of the current global power. Now, why do people think it's declining though? There has to be a reason for it. The reason for perception is the withdrawing from its aggressive posture. For example, ending combat operations in Iraq and withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan. So over the course of time, there are many parameters which dictate if a state is a superpower. I'll focus on foreign policy because that is the most evident to every country in the world. Over the course of time, US foreign policy or American foreign policy fluctuated amongst interventionary, restrained, and isolationist approach. American soldiers have been deployed abroad almost continuously since the end of World War II. The best known foreign interventions in Vietnam, Afghanistan, and Iraq were large, long, and costly. But there have been dozens of several other deployments. Some were shorter, some were smaller, but for purposes ranging from deterrence to training. Taken as a whole, these foreign interventions have a mixed record. Some were successful, like the Operation Desert Storm in 1991 in Iraq, which swept the Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein's forces out of Kuwait. That largely succeeded. But there are again some others, one of which I personally think is a massive disaster, is Libya and Iraq and Afghanistan. So with such a mixed track record, it's understandable that the perception is of the US global world order is that of a decline. But there's also something unique to US foreign policy, which many other states in the world do not share, is the US foreign policy and the elected president hold a strong correlation. So you see a strong shift in the direction of foreign policy as and when a new commander-in-chief is elected. So the U.S. approach to foreign policy under Biden administration moved away from Middle East and started to focus on Indo-Pacific. So that also, because U.S. has a strong history of taking an aggressive posture in Middle East, that shift also caused a perception of a U.S. decline. It also created a power vacuum in there, which gave opportunity for the likes like People's Republic of China and even Russia to enter and show their dominance. So again, to summarize the foreign interventions, I would say Vietnam was long, costly, Somalia, Iraq, Libya, and others. Also, there have been successful foreign interventions and where U.S. saved democracy like Haiti, Bosnia, Kosovo, and a few other countries. These interventions were deemed successful based on their ability to achieve their objectives. So although there were blunders in foreign policy in the past, the United States is known to come back in foreign policy. The biggest example is disaster in Vietnam for almost for about 20 years. And then ultimately, I don't know if you could use the word won, but the US won the Cold War. So the US has a history of coming back, even in terms of a decline. So to summarize, I would say, given the history of foreign policy of the United States, it's understandable if US gives a perception of decline, but I still think it's not about decline. It's about its self-inflicted wounds, which US created as a result of failed foreign policies, some of them, not all of them, in the past. However, given its military might and its military spending, I personally still think US cannot be written off. There's opportunity for others to grow, but still, US cannot be written off, and US will bounce back. And I'll put my timer on it, 5 minutes, 47 seconds. I think I'm on time. I'll wait for any other questions in the next few minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Arun. I love you for timing yourself. I'm really happy that you stuck to the timeline. Very brief, very succinct presentation, and you made your point very well. Now it's my honor and privilege to invite our second distinguished panelist, that is Dr. Pusarla. Dr. Pusarla, the platform is yours. Kindly stick to the timeline and follow the example set by Arun Ayyagari. And you may have to unmute yourself because you're muted right now.
Namaste everyone, and thank you Adityanjee for giving me this opportunity to be part of this learned discussion panels. I just want to put two opposing views which have been very dominant in the US arena right now. And this discussion coming in the backdrop of assassination attempt on Republican candidate Trump, I think I cannot miss out on this because so many things have the discussion about the relevance of US or its grandstanding, everything has become a questionable affair, more so after this event. So while the partisan reportage of the event, of the terrifying event, has exposed what it meant to the domestic affairs, or it has given an idea about what has happening in the US per se. So that has exposed a kind of a hyper partisanship and a deep polarization within. So that perception, building on to that, there has been a recent study conducted by RAND, where they have actually, without bringing into surface anything related to strategic affairs, they have positioned it rather ambiguously, saying that whether when it has been a kind of a sociological and historical, it has taken a sociological and historical approach and has tried to address issues regarding US national dynamism. Okay, but by and large, they have come to a conclusion that US is much shakier, on a much shakier ground than it was earlier, and it has pointed out 7 basic aspects that it felt like US has to keenly work on. So while to say that US exterior atmosphere is relatively stable and it has like really presented itself as the supreme power or the unipolar, still being the numero uno power in the world. But there is this kind of a perception which is setting in. There is another dominant perception which has already been existing, that is given the kind of when you take into consideration the comprehensive national power, US ticks all the boxes, and it is right to be it has every right to be judged as the #1 supreme power. But then the things doesn't stop there, because there is one thing called as the emerging world, where small emerging economies like China and India are like emerging in their own ways, trying to create a kind of an alternative system, not really so stubborn, robust to compete with the US, but then they have been trying in their own ways to create some kind of alternative alternative institutions, alternative multilateral organizations, where they are presenting themselves that they can address the global challenges and global issues as well. So right now, it is like a kind of a thing, you have two dominant voices which are growing when simultaneously running, one in the foreground and one in one in the background. So it is like strikingly evident even in the campaign of both the parties in the presidential election. While one says make America great again, another is promising a great future. Similarly, while you can say even when it comes to foreign policy, there is that kind of a divergence which is becoming more apparent. So to say that one party still regards Russia as its #1 enemy, the other party is like rising above all these things, and it is saying that our adversary is China. So this kind of a conflict, while as we say, when we take the stable metrics into consideration, US is still unbeatable, and nobody is in close range to it. But then when it comes to realities, it is no longer what do you say, invincible, because its Monroe Doctrine is being challenged and it's being surveillanced, like the presence of a secret bases in Cuba, and then some random events, but all these random events together make up the whole story, saying that US is no longer insular. So with these few views, I put forth my perspective about the topic. Thank you once again for giving me this opportunity, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Pusarla. Again, very succinct presentation. You put forth your views very clearly, very cogently, and you stuck to the timeline. So that is very good. Now it's my pleasure to invite Professor Madhav Nalapat. Professor Madhav Nalapat, the floor is yours. Please unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Adityanjee, and by the grace of God, the unusual self has not prevented either UNESCO or Manipal University from continuing to keep me on their records as the UNESCO Peace Chair and as the director of the School of Geopolitics. I'm quite grateful to both UNESCO and Manipal University. And I just want to point out a few things which from our perspective in Asia, our perspective in India. We are not talking about an American perspective here. We are talking about an Indian perspective. So I would request everybody to understand that quite clearly. Now, the US role in terms of its strength and potency has not diminished. If anything, it has only increased. But the US role and the perception of the US has certainly diminished in the global south. There's no question about it. And it has certainly diminished in the Indo-Pacific. We have just heard that Biden is now focusing on the Indo-Pacific. Well, from the perspective that we have here, he's focusing on the Atlantic still. I mean, he's obviously very familiar with the Atlantic. For 30 years and more as a senator, he has been completely steeped in Atlanticist philosophy, where Russia is the enemy and China is an opportunity. Whereas the situation is quite different in the Indo-Pacific today, as you have mentioned many times, Dr. Adityanjee. Now, I mean, again, I want to say this is from an Indian perspective. And of course, we do our own travel, we do our own studies, we do our own contacts. Wall Street has always had a very huge influence on US politics. China had a huge influence on Wall Street, but fortunately, over the past, I would say, decade or so, that influence has sharply reduced. So there's no question that that influence is sharply reduced, and I would say thank God for that, where Wall Street is concerned, because there is a, the Wall Street needs to join Cold War 2.2 in the sense of understanding where the dots connect. Now, in India, we've been talking in terms of, of Russia. I see a constant dialogue among my US friends. Oh, you're pro-Russia. I mean, look, Prime Minister Modi signed the Quad. He joined the Quad. He revitalized the Quad with Shinzo Abe. He signed the 3 foundation agreements with the United States. He has had more military exercises with the United States during the last 10 years than during the previous period. There's no question about that. But the point is, his focus is the Indo-Pacific. His focus is a little continent called Asia and a little bit of water called the Indo-Pacific. And I'm not sure that the United States is unaware of either the Indo-Pacific or Asia, or is in any way unconnected with that. In fact, it's an essential power in both the Eurasian landmass and the Indo-Pacific. But unfortunately, it seems that almost most of the oxygen has been diverted back to Europe, back to Russia through the Ukraine war. And frankly, some of us are nervous that this might give a free pass to a certain country to invade and occupy Taiwan, which I believe and many others believe, including the US, would be a far bigger disaster for the democracies than Ukraine not recovering the lands lost in 2014. We know the Russians quite well. From the beginning, they wanted to keep control of those lands that they had seized in 2014, and nothing more than that. And Putin had made that clear. And today you're seeing the Russians move to areas which safeguards that particular land and the Russian-speaking people there in a time when after 2014, there's a considerable difference. Now, I mean, that's how we look at it from here. I don't know. I don't think that's how the parts of the Biden administration see it. I think the Pentagon looks at it in a much better light than the State Department. But the White House seems to be fixated on Europe and fixated on Ukraine. I mean, Taiwan is getting nothing free. India is getting nothing free. Ukraine is getting quite a lot and is continuously getting. Now, Trump, in our personal view, Trump and Vance, the team, will be much more focused on the Indo-Pacific than Biden-Harris. There's no question about that. Just as in Taiwan, you have the team of Lai and Xiao, Bi-khim Xiao. They'll be very focused on the United States. There's no question about that. And both Dr. Lai and Vice President Bi-khim Xiao. So in the case of India, if you look at Trump and J.D. Vance as the president and vice president, there's no doubt that their views on China are very different from what the views are of many in the Democratic side, that at least I have interacted with. You had Peter Navarro in jail. You have Steve Bannon still in jail. You have Trump on charges, which frankly, I'd like to say, practically every politician is guilty of. Practically every president, including Biden, by the way, who got away because he's supposed to be, I don't know, he would have made a good impression on the jury. I don't know how the prosecutor could read the mind of a jury so well and basically refuse to do anything about about President Biden, but there has to be one yardstick for Biden and one for Trump. And the lack of a yardstick is hurting Trump. I mean, it's hurting Biden. And this focus on Europe and focus on Ukraine is certainly hurting, Biden. Now, Obama did mention a pivot to the Indo-Pacific, but frankly, the influence of Wall Street was very strong on Obama. Let's be honest. He was an outstanding president. Lyndon Johnson did a lot for the underprivileged. Obama tried to do a lot, and he has done a lot. His healthcare, for example, Obamacare, fantastic. But again, the fact is that millions of Americans lost their homes because of foreclosures, and money was not spent on preventing those loss of homes, while at the same time, untold, hundreds of billions of dollars were spent subsidizing banks and financial institutions. Of course, it turned out to be overall a good investment, but so would have been in not allowing people to leave their homes, because that makes them less productive. That makes them, much less able to do things. And I'm glad
Mr.
J.D.
Nalapat,
Vance
you
said.
have 1 minute to conclude.
I just want to say, I want to end this by saying, yes, the US role is powerful and is essential, but unfortunately, in the global south, it seems to have diminished quite a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Nalapat. And now we have our last distinguished panelist, Brigadier Arun Sagal. Brigadier Saab, the floor is yours. The opening statement limit is 7 minutes. Kindly stick to the timeline, please.
Yeah, thank you. I'll stick to the time. Okay, my first point is United States is a very big power, major power, but in this global system, there is another thing called, beyond the elements which you read in CIPRI and other military balances, it's called the leverageable power. How much power can you leverage? Issue one. Issue two is the important issue, part of the leverageable power is this, that you are an offshore power outside the United States. So please understand this. United States is an offshore power. It has to build capacities, capabilities everywhere to fight or to even maintain peace and security. It could do it in Kuwait, it could do it in Iraq, because there were no credible conflict or resistance to it. It cannot do so easily in Asia. Please understand this part. Three, United States is currently hugely overstretched. It is fighting three wars simultaneously: wars, stroke conflicts, or its deployments. It's fighting in Ukraine, which is sapping its energy. It's this whole purpose of United States and its alliance partners in NATO is to undermine Putin's Russia and remove Russia as a threat. Something which is not happening, and this is, unfortunately, it is taking far too much of their time and capacities. Result, there is one word which is being used outside the United States. It's called 155. What is 155? It's called 155 ammunition artillery shell. That's one issue. Whenever we talk to our American friends, whether from U.S. War College and other places where they come, issue is, who can provide this kind of assistance to us? Where are these ammunition going to come from? So what has happened is, 155 is not is a shell only. It indicates the lack of capacities and capabilities over a period of time that has happened in the United States to fight these kind of wars and secondly issue is, technologically also, while the United States have a military industrial complex, it has one of the finest engineers. But please remember one thing, your capacity to produce is going down. You do not have that kind of capacity. For example, to maintain your naval ships, you have just got 2 yards. If one stops to operate for some reason or the other, your capacities are coming down. You can make only one nuclear submarine in 1 year or a year plus. What is it? And the so-called AUKUS, is a 2040 institution, sir. Nothing is going to happen before 2040. So what are we looking at? When I sit down in Delhi and try to look at United States and its power and influence, I'm worried. I'm worried for 2, 3 reasons. Number one, the Indo-Pacific strategy is no longer Indo-Pacific. It remains set to become Asia-Pacific. There is no Indian Ocean deployments United States has, neither it has the capacities. I've just come back from United States after meeting the administration people as well as the highest level think tanks. We are aware that they do not have the capacity and they've told us in no uncertain terms. Number two, the security architecture, which is now being brought up in East Asia and Western Pacific, is weak. Please study the latest report from RAND Corporation, which talks about 4 of its allies as middle powers. They are Canada, UK, Japan, and Australia. And its conclusions are very fascinating. Its conclusions say, A, they do not have the military heft to support credible American power and influence in the region. And this whole issue, the whole report is based on a future conflict scenario with Taiwan. They do not, the only thing they can provide is a diplomatic support and impose and help United States impose sanctions, period. Please also note the 2 of these major powers in Africa, in Asia, that is Japan and Australia, are hugely economically linked to China. You can build as many high fences and small yards and a de-risking strategy, but the fact of the matter is this, is that almost all major Asian states, particularly in East Asia, are linked to China in economic terms. Southeast Asia have by and large made up their mind they will be playing a balancing role. They will not take sides. And second thing is they are getting inundated by Chinese economic and trade presence. RCEP, TPPs are all very central to their own existence. So they are not into game of power balancing game. They are into economic game. So if they are into economic game, that's where they are going to be. Powers like Indonesia and all are playing the balancing role. So please get the reality check. The reality check basically is this, that your power, American power and influence, certainly there as a part of a containment strategy and not a conflict strategy. United States cannot, I have said that in DC, I'm saying it today, United States cannot afford a conflict on Taiwan. The good part is that China cannot either. China is not as strong as it claims to be. It has got a large number of deficiencies, which we can talk about something else. Now, the big question is, how are the other players in the region looking at the United States? India looks at the United States as a consequential partner. True. But when we start getting into the nitty-gritty of our relationship, we find the constraints are there. Fault is ours also, fault is American also. But the major deal-breaking issues that we discussed in 2023 during Prime Minister Modi's visit, nothing has come to fruition and nothing is in the pipeline in a hurry. Please understand that. The joke of the day today is the GE 404 engines, not 414 engines, 404 engines, hundreds of them which we contracted for are stuck in a pipeline or simply not available. So it gives a perception. Okay, the perception basically is this: is that is United States capable of delivering what it promises? That's the point. Now we come into the other areas, and particularly in West Asia. Now again, the West Asia, the whole issue is IMEC is a phenomenally good idea. IMEC, if it can come to fructification, it will connect Europe with Middle East and connect with India and get all these markets integrated into one big, huge economic stakeholding system. But it's not happening. I2U2, again not happening. So the question basically is this, is that the United States is overextended, it is dissipated in its thinking, and strategically it refuses to understand one small factor. The life up there in Indo-Pacific is changing. And I'll close by telling you one last point is this, is that when we were there, for the first time, the Americans realized that Indo-Pacific is far too big a command and it needs to be changed, or let's put it, reorganized. And the reorganization now they're talking about is creating a Middle East command from the Africa Command and the Central Command, which will look after the Middle East portion and come up to the Indian Ocean, and then leaving the Asia Pacific to the Indo-Pacific Command. But again, the problem comes with resources. There are no resources. And then there is another, there are contra moves taking place, like the Russian move into North Korea, the Russian move to Vietnam, etc. So these geopolitical moves, elements, etc., are creating a situation where major regional players, particularly in Asia, in Indo-Pacific, like India, while remaining committed to our relationship with the United States, have started to hedge their bets. Thank you.
Thank you, Brigadier Sagal, for your very educational point of view, because people do not talk about some of the issues that you touched upon. So we have the opening statement from all our four distinguished panelists. We will move on to the next phase, which is moderated discussion, in which I will ask a round of questions to all our panelists one by one. So my first question goes to Arun Ayyagari. Arun, you have talked about, the might of US economy and the might of US military. You did acknowledge some of the, failures, relative failures. And you said that, yes, US is not collapsing and nor it is likely to collapse. It is not the Soviet Union of 1990. We are not facing that moment. The question I have for you is the debt to GDP ratio. You know what is the debt to GDP ratio for United States, the sole superpower? Before you answer that question, it's a specific economic question because you have been commenting on de-dollarization. So you really need to address this economic question because there's no military power that can sustain itself unless it is sustaining its economy. Thank you. Kindly unmute yourself.
Okay, so that was a factual question. I was trying to look for the exact number. So I don't know the exact ratio, but I know that the debt is huge. It's several trillion, 33 trillion, and I know those numbers. But I was quickly looking at some numbers here. It says it's over 100%. That's the ratio for the past few years. So I understand, but there's two mights. One is the military might, and the other is a might of resolution to continue the military dominance, right? If you look at, since I have something to do with military, I can say the budget is, in terms of dollar amounts, the budget is almost is close to $700 to $800 billion a year, something in that range. It fluctuates, obviously. So, and its willingness to spend on military. In fact, I would say one of the biggest parameters which defines a country as a global power, or a dominant power, I should say, or hegemonic power, is its willingness and ability to spend on military/defense. And the US has been topping that. Like I said before, it's more than like 10 countries combined. So I didn't get what the question is. I mean, I know you made a comment. So what exactly is the question, Dr. Adityanjee? You're mute. Dr. Adityanjee, you're on mute.
You have to unmute yourself, Dr. Adityanjee.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
So
Sorry, you got me excited.
The
there
debt to
about comments.
GDP ratio is more than 123% as of 2023 figures.
Yes.
Now, this level of debt financing, how long this sustain the military strength of United States?
Okay. Yeah, got the question. Well, the U.S. You always ask me questions where I'm uncomfortable to answer. The U.S. has been in debt for a long time. Okay, this is not something new, and this is why every year we know this. The other speakers have been using names like Biden, Trump, and Vance, and others. People who know me know that I dearly love politics, so I'm trying to restrain myself from making any political statements. But still, since it's relevant to the question, every single year there's a problem with the debt, so they keep raising the debt ceiling, and we know that this happens in September. End of September, there's chaos all the time. So my answer to your question is, it has been sustaining for a long time now. So I think it will continue to sustain. But there are other countries also who have a lot of debt, but considerably lower, especially China. And China is very good in making its payments than US, I should say, more timely and good. So the answer to your question is, I think and I hope it will continue to the point where I think it's become it's become regular and common to people. The people got so used to that they just complain. But that's never a primary question. If I watched all debates from 1960 since JFK debated, the first televised debate ever, or presidential debates, excuse me. So this comes up all the time, but it's never as serious as other questions. So I think the American public has decided to kind of ignore that question a little bit. So sorry, that's all I have to answer that question.
Thank you, Arun. You have tried to your level best, but it is an indicator, this high debt to GDP ratio. Nothing is going to happen tomorrow or in 5 years or in 10 years. It's a slow process, but the future is not very good if you have that level of debt financing. My next question goes to Dr. Pusarla. Dr. Pusarla, you did talk about internal politics in United States. And in fact, out of all the distinguished panelists, you were the only one who referred to the attempted assassination of a political candidate. And in this forum, we usually don't get into the issue of party politics or partisan party politics, but geopolitics and international relations. So the question I have for you is the enemy in US society, the disjointedness, the internal strife we are witnessing at this point in US civil society. What do you think? And including this attempted assassination of a political candidate, because the usual aphorism is that you believe in ballot or bullets. Do you settle an argument by ballot or by the might of power internally that defines the civilizational level of a society? Have we reached a narrative as far as US internal society is concerned? And does this portray what is going to happen in future?
Yeah. Actually, to admit, my intention was not to comment on the US internal politics or the domestic affairs, but when you are going to look at a country on a whole, you have to basically take into consideration both the external and internal coherence or so that together makes a country what it is, and it is assessed on based on all these factors, because though both these factors are not mutually independent. Okay, that's my first submission. The second one is the reference to US democracy immediately is the first thing on Indians' mind, because it's the only country that regularly comments on Indian democracy or democracy for example, in any corner of the world. That's the second thing. The third thing is like the internal conflict is no longer insular to like foreign interventions. So whenever you have this kind of a any internal disturbance always have some vested interests in play. These vested interests can be internal or like external. So this indicates that there is some role play of the external factors. So it also indicates that the aura of invincibility or like the kind of the influence or the dominance that US has already projected is being challenged now. It is being punctured. So that's another way that that's another thing that I wanted to point out. The fourth thing that I wanted to say is like any kind of an internal conflict is going to take a toll on foreign affairs or its foreign policy, because like unless until there is some kind of a cohesion or kind of a mutual consensus between the political parties, it will be very difficult to take and what do you say, to arrive at an implementable foreign policy, which is the need of the hour. So all these things are critically intertwined, and that's the reason why I had to start my discussion with the recent event. I think I have answered all the questions.
Thank you, Dr. Pusarla. My next question goes to Professor Nalapat. Professor Nalapat, you were very vocal in emphasizing the Indo-Pacific issues and the relative lack of action by US as a superpower in the Indo-Pacific at this point in time. With relative diminution of US power projection in the Indo-Pacific region, do you think a situation has arrived that the reigning hegemon and the rising hegemon might enter into what is called Thucydides trap? What are your views on that?
Yeah, Dr. Adityanjee, as has correctly been said, Japan, South Korea, United States, Europe, these have been big markets for China. And yes, as of now, many of the companies are still hanging on to that particular market, and China is the production base. But in my view, in this new situation, I do believe that that's going to be increasingly start diminishing and create opportunities for other countries. Now, Arun was Arun was talking about the United States and dollarization, not a problem. Look, it is a problem. When you have sanctions after sanctions, people are reluctant to hold on to the dollar. The Chinese, by the way, have been offloading dollars in a very big way as part of de-dollarization. India went into a rupee ruble deal with Russia. The Russians initially, on the prompting of Chinese, wanted us to do a rupee RMB, an RMB ruble deal. We did a rupee ruble deal. The reason is the sanctions. We can't do it in US dollars. We can't do it in euro because Russia has been sanctioned. I mean, the largest, resource-rich country in Europe and Asia. Now you have made it fly into the arms of China. And may I remind you that during Cold War 1.2, Arun said US won the war. Yes, it won the war with the help of local allies in NATO. And frankly, it won the war with the help of China. China played a very big role against the USSR. And I can assure you, nobody in Russia has forgotten that. It would have been an ideal situation, frankly, if Russia had been on the Western side during this new Cold War, but a situation has been created in which that's become impossible. So de-dollarization is now becoming inevitable, largely because of financial sanctions. And India, so far we have escaped some sanctions. There are still some sanctions, but frankly, we went into this deal because the dollar is no longer tradable in any trade with Russia. And it's the Chinese are freely using RMB. I don't see as much discussion about RMB and ruble as about the rupee and the ruble. And may I say a very good reason why Prime Minister Modi opted for that. He opted for that so that the poor in India can continue to have 800 million of them can have subsidized food. And that is happening. The oil was much cheaper than would have been the case had we not used Russian oil. And I'm sure nobody is suggesting that a country like India, which is hardly a rich country by any standard, should deny itself the advantage of lower resource prices, if necessary, by a rupee ruble deal. And that's what India has done. And my last point is President Biden, is fixated by Europe. And one way is basically saying he wants to drag NATO everywhere, even in the Indo-Pacific. As I think some of the panelists mentioned, Libya, Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, I mean Vietnam. But tell me which conflict in Asia the United States has prevailed over, especially in the 21st century. The withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021 created a huge dent in US credibility as a security ally in Asia. Let me tell you, in 2022, this fixation on Ukraine created a huge dent in confidence in the United States as a security partner, when everybody frankly looked at and saw that it was completely focused on Europe and Ukraine and nothing, and that much less oxygen. Now in 2023, you have the Gaza war. And frankly, Hamas is a terror group. Israel is not. Let's be honest about that. And Netanyahu is making a terrible blunder. I wish Supreme Court or the president of Israel gives him a pardon so that he can get out of this war. And I think he has more or less broken the military wing of Hamas, which now he needs to do before the world is drawn into a major conflict, which is likely to happen the uncontrolled way in which Biden is removing restrictions and the Europeans are removing restrictions on Russia, to the alarm of their own people. So don't drag NATO into Asia. We don't want NATO and the Europeans to start like local sheriffs and walk around with their badges. We want local powers, the way you did in Europe. What's different from Asia and Europe is that Asia is now much bigger, much stronger economy, especially in PPP terms, and much more significant for US security than Europe is. Unfortunately, I don't think Washington has got that message. The ruling establishment there doesn't seem to have got that message. But yes, the DOD has got that message, but not others. So I just like to point out, create a NATO kind of alliance in Asia.
Thank you, Professor Nalapat, for your points. My last question will go to Brigadier Arun Sagal. You have talked about relative decline, regional lack of power projection, inability to deliver. What we have not discussed is the US role or lack of it in a very specific region, and that is South China Sea. US lack of power projection over almost more than a decade in that part of the world, is that telling you some trends, what is happening to a declining superpower?
Okay, as far as US and the South China Sea is concerned, the whole element of Philippines becoming a linchpin of the United States strategy is to ensure that the Boshai Channel and the areas of entry into the South China Sea are kept open by the United States military power, particularly the naval power, and to contain and contest the breakout strategy of the Chinese. Please see, if you look at the map carefully, South China Sea is basically a lake, is a huge lake where the Chinese are trapped. You have to understand this logic from the Chinese perspective. Chinese are trapped. Chinese may have a 350 ship navy, they might have a 400 ship navy, but they are nowhere in the business of power projection at this point in time. A, because in the east there is a wall. The wall is called the first island chain. Now that wall has been extended right up to the Bosai Channel, up to the Philippines. The whole idea is to control, close. The second area from where they can project power is the Malacca Strait and Sunda and Lombok. Those areas are now the whole aim of the exercise of AUKUS is to deploy a adequate number of forces, particularly the naval forces, submarine SSNs, and along with India to ensure that the Chinese power is contested and contained within the South China Sea. Now, the problem basically is this. The treaty arrangements with Philippines or the United States, do they allow United States to play the kind of a role which they will have to play if they want to maintain their ascendancy in this area? Purely because if you have seen the Chinese actions lately, they will come out all guns blazing because they understand what it all means. It's a strategic nightmare for the Chinese to get bottled into it. And please understand this: when the Chinese Navy is deployed and fighting in the South China Sea, it is the back from where they are operating from is the mainland China, the Han China, the eastern coast of China, the southeastern coast of China. There are the areas where the entire edifice of the military industrial complex as well as economic centers of power are located of the Chinese. So the issue basically comes about is that up to a point it'll be a game of chicken and egg being played out, massive posturing going on, but should it push comes to a shove, it will lead to a conflict. The core strategy of the Chinese in this region is to undermine United States influence. And if they can undermine United States influence, it'll create an Sino-centric Asia. Moment you create a Sino-centric Asia, and if by that time, thanks to United States, they have not delivered Russia to the China, and if it has been delivered, then you will then see this whole region. And here it is important. The continental Asia, starting from Eurasia to Vladivostok, becoming an area of influence of Chinese and the Russians, and the rimland Asia, all along the coastal belt, becoming again an area of influence of the Chinese. Now, where will the United States power and influence go? The whole business of NATO coming here is an absolute bunkum. I mean, NATO does not have the capacities, capabilities, blah blah blah. They have nothing. We can play a bigger role. But the point here again is this: is that in our discourses and discussions with the United States, they do not seem to understand how to collate power and create an credible architecture in Indo-Pacific. And I say Indo-Pacific, my Indo-Pacific from east coast of Africa to the Western Pacific. We are looking at that area. And here, United States, I'm afraid, either will have to learn to live with the situation, or if they want to do something better, they'll have to incorporate us in a more meaningful play in developing a collective architecture with one factor, and that is building up a greater mutual trust. I'm sorry, at this point in time, at Grassati's statements in Delhi recently, where I was present in that lecture, I was a panelist in one of the following panels on Indo-US Technology Cooperation. He, I'm afraid, was very disingenuous, and he tried to push the whole element of trust on us rather than becoming a partner in building up mutual trust. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Brigadier Sagal. You made your point very emphatically, and that enriches and enlivens the discussion. Now, instead of having a second round of moderated questions to the panel, I'm going to do something unusual. Instead of those 4 questions, I will invite 4 people from the audience to give 2 minutes comments each, because we have a depth of experience in the audience and I don't want that to remain untapped. I will start with Ambassador Kapoor. 2 minute statement on this question. Is US a declining superpower?
Thank you very much, Dr. Adityanjee. It has been fascinating to listen to the distinguished panel. What I'd like to say is focus very briefly on the internal situation in the US, because the power of a country is a sum total of all its powers: internal power, external power, political power, geopolitical power, military power, etc. Now, I sit here in Washington, D.C. There are lots of challenges which the US is facing internally. I will list some of them very briefly. First of all, the breaking US forces have become bolder and are more active, and they are manifested in different ways. The drugs, for example, fentanyl and other deadly drugs, there's an epidemic here of that drugs here. Mental health has become a serious issue, and China is not playing sort of a positive role. It's playing a significant role in encouraging that. The debt situation has been discussed already. It is more than $36 trillion. Now, it would not have been a matter of as much concern as Arun Ayyagari has explained maybe 5 years back. Today and tomorrow and day after tomorrow, it's going to become a matter of more serious concern, because the dollar acceptance in the world has decreased by 40% since the start of the Ukraine war. Now that is accelerating. That is a matter of very great concern, because if it was still a major currency and accepted currency all over the world, it would not have been so serious. So the sanctions on Russia have boomeranged very, very badly on the Western world and on the US in particular. Russian economy is doing relatively well in spite of the sanctions compared to the Western economies. Then there is the jihadi element and the other elements which are working in the universities, for example, in support of terrorism. Their strength has gone up very significantly in the last few years, which is a very big shock to a person like me sitting here and observing the scenario. Wokeism is on the increase, very much on the increase. People like George Soros and all are funding, besides these jihadi elements in the universities, also a lot of woke elements all over the country. So there is a lot of divisiveness, there's a lot of polarization that is increasing phenomenally. The migration issue has also become a very serious issue for US, in the sense that it has become very easy for any country to send in their people into US through the borders, porous borders now. So anybody can walk in and come in, including dubious elements whose background checks are very, very shallow now. Economic situation internally, in terms of the inflation and in terms of the pressure on the people, is higher now. The education scenario in the universities, in terms of the strength which the universities had earlier, and in terms of the applications globally, that is also going down, because that is one of the significant strengths of the US. Externally, globally, already a lot of discussion has taken place. So for a US to be faced with the Ukraine-Russia war and the repercussions of the oil prices, and buying Russian oil through India at lower rates for the entire Western world and for the US, I guess it's a very surprising matter, because they are on the one hand imposing sanctions, and on the other hand doing just the opposite of what the sanctions are supposed to do. The Israel-Palestine war, the situation in the South China, East China Seas, and the China-Taiwan situation, the coalescing of forces which are ranged against the US in terms of Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, and others. So earlier it could galvanize a lot of strengths and powers. Now it cannot do that so easily. It requires a lot of support from other countries like India. The priorities also are slightly confused, but the positives are also many. As I sit here, I observe. So it is, like Arun mentioned, Arun Ayyagari, it's a slowly declining power. It's not a fast declining power. On the other hand, one of the best scenarios for the US is that China also is a very declining power. So the challenge it faced from China earlier as becoming a rising hegemon is decreasing by the day. China also is also a growing country. The US has a great capacity to reinvent itself. It's a very resilient country. It's a democracy. So I'm sure it'll do self-correction as we go along on many of these issues.
Thank
It
you,
will
Ambassador
tackle some
Kapoor.
of these
You can
issues.
conclude, please.
And the last comment I would like to make is that after 2050, it is not going to be a US century or a China century or a Asia Pacific century. I think it's going to be an India century. Thank you, Adityanjee.
Thank you, Ambassador Kapoor, for your comments. I agree with you that after 2015, it is becoming an Indian century.
2050, 2050, yes.
I'm going to call from a couple of my audience. They may or may not be prepared, but I see a depth of experience here. And if people are reluctant to comment, I would understand, but I would start with Vice Admiral Sinha. Vice Admiral Sinha, you bring a lot of naval experience to this discussion. Would you like to make any comments for a couple of minutes, please?
Well, good evening, sir, and thank you very much for noticing my presence and giving me a chance. Can I be heard?
Yes, you can. We can hear you very clearly.
I think we need to understand that the in American interest, the U.S. interest in the Indo-Pacific, it may have temporarily got diverted because of the Israel, Gaza, and both Ukraine. But I am quite confident that the convergence of India and US in the Indo-Pacific is quite solid because we have one singular aim, and that is to contain and resist China's meteoric rise. Uh, I visit China quite often, and I don't see any signs of its decline. It's very much there. It's slowed down, no doubt about that. It is slow in its progress because of the type of system, but only day before the third plenum meeting has taken place. And I do see certain attempt to modify, to restructure the financial system. Let us see how much do they improve. Let's not write off China so quickly. Similarly, I don't think US is a declining. I don't think that US is a declining power. I think the what has happened that the gap between the US and rest of the world has reduced quite phenomenally, and I find that a lot of people say that US is declining, US is declining. I'm not sure. I don't think so. US still remains the largest GDP in the world. US still remains the strongest military power in the world. Yes, other people have caught up, but all two, three, four, number five economies combined also, they are not equal to US. So how do we say that, US is on the decline? Similarly, the military manufacturing complex, I think the Chinese will take, 2, 3 decades to catch up. Okay, they are doing good in artificial intelligence, but mind you, the ban on the export of the semiconductor components, I think that is going to hurt them quite a lot. And the ban by the Indians on the large number of apps, it has hurt the economy by nearly $6-7 billion. So I think that these are the kind of effort which is required. And if I see the statements made by Vice President nominee J.D. Vance and President Trump, ex-President Trump, I think the Chinese are heading for some more trouble, and they are not going to get away. My suggestion, very much as a sort of political science student, that America must build bridges with Russia. They are not your opponents. You're making them an opponent. Your main challenge will remain China. And I think that is where America should concentrate. Right now, you're diverted in many places, and that is making everybody feel weak. Why it is being felt you are becoming less effective? It is a fact. Because other people have also increased their gross national power. And it is bound to happen. And I quite agree, but 2050 onwards, maybe slightly earlier, the century will be India's century. It's already heading for a multipolar world. So that's not because the Americans are going down. It is because the other people are also catching up with America. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Admiral Sinha. I am going to invite Mr. Shashank from the audience. Sir, would you like to make any comments?
Well, I just joined a little late, but I agree with the last speaker that it would be a misunderstanding on our part to see that America is declining. It's a relative position. China is rising very fast, there is no doubt. Somehow in the American strategic community, I find that the influence of the military industrial complex people and the these neocons still remains very high, and they want to sometimes replace Pakistan by India. They are not thinking in terms of treating India as a equal partner of trust, mutual trust. They feel that India should be like running errands as instructed by the American side. Pakistan played along the game very well while doing something completely to the contrary of the wishes of the Americans. Indians don't do that as a democracy, and the Americans have a better understanding of the Indian society inside. But what they know now is that if they pressurize India with regard to the domestic fault lines, then India will not take it very lying down, and I think there will be a little difficulty. So I think right now we are going through that phase where the feeling in India that America will be our best partner in the Modi-Trump regime, following with the Obama and all that. Now that is creating some problem that the Obama and Biden, they have started playing upon the fault lines within India, and that Indians are not liking that much. So I think America needs some course correction on that thing. This is the expectation of friends of America in India. And I would count myself as one of the friends who would like to have friendship with a knowledge-based society rather than which is a completely opaque society in China. I mean, I have many Chinese friends also, and who have very high respect for the Indians, especially Buddhism and the Hindu philosophy, which had been carried to China long time ago. But the point is that the China remains an opaque society. We would like them to become more open, so which will take a long time. So I think in the beginning, we have to first hope that America and India would be able to get closer together. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Shashank. And I am going to invite Mr. Vibhuti Jha from the audience to give just a 2 minutes comments. Vibhuti ji, are you there? It looks like he is not available right now. Would have liked to have his comments on this. So now we move on to the questions and comments from the chat room. And looks like some of the...
Adityanjee, I'm here. I'm here.
Oh, you are here.
Except
Please
that,
come. Please come.
except that I was I have just downloaded your WebEx thing official, so I'm here.
Okay.
It is wonderful to
We'd
be
love
with
to hear
you.
from you. Is US the declining superpower, Vibhuti?
We have talked about it in our show on Jaipur Dialogue a couple of times that, whatever goes up has to come down. And we all know that life is not a linear movement. It's a dynamic movement of up and down, ebb and flows that happens. So it is wonderful to listen to Ambassador Kapoor, who is a good friend. Nalapat ji, aapse mulaqat hui hai, and a couple of them. But I want to say a few things here. I'm very delighted that some of you mentioned that United States, India will be the rising power. As a matter of fact, you will be glad to know that I have personally opined that this century belongs to Sanatan and Hindu and India, and I'm very clear about that. And as one of my friends, a very learned friend, said, they're the unholy alliance of what do you call the James Bond megalomaniac billionaires, elitists, in combination with some of the evil forces, will try to undermine us because they fear India. So number two is the fact that Arun Ayyagari was talking about the 33 or 36 trillion dollars. Remember one thing, there is a point in time when your obesity overcomes you very badly. So United States is a remarkably obese country, not only physically, but financially as well. Whether it will be able to sustain it or not will depend upon the political will. But what is in the United States' favor is the reality that it's a remarkably resource-rich country. It's not a single product country, which is where the alignment needs to happen. That despite the ability to print currencies is going slowly, but it will have a deleterious impact eventually, because it's very easy to print notes and put on weight. Very tough to lose a kilo of weight. Those of us who have struggled with that know it very well. I like to, beyond intellectualization of a problem, I like to simplify, believing in Einstein's statement that any intelligent fool can complicate a simple problem. It takes courage to move in the other direction. So the issue, which is very true, is that India and the United States, I call them as the two most prominent democracies of the world. What is pitiable on my side of the story is that America is somewhere along the line, despite all the Pentagon noise and strategic partners and everything else, it's not treating India fairly as a democracy. And it better realize it. So I would say that the mighty people who are on the panel here, and I respectfully say that, we all have to collectively implore upon America that treat India as your partner, not as a pariah or just a friend in need kind of a thing. So if I have questioned this very clearly, that you have to make a strategic choice, whether you prefer Pannu or you prefer India, whether you prefer terrorism, freedoms of all kinds, which kind of deters a relationship as an irritational factor. So I opine, and I submit this thought to all of you, that freedom is being used as the fault line of democracy, whether we like it or not. Freedom is being used as the fault line of democracy by everyone who doesn't believe in democracy, who in their own minds will not grant you any freedom if they were to rule us. So let's be careful. There is a thing called, the definition of poison is anything in excess. So that's where we have to put our foot down. People in military, people in real politics, in banking, everywhere, there is a line you can't go beyond. And that's the line we are crossing right now. So I have always wondered why the world bends backwards to accommodate a theology or a policy that hurts you. It is in the name of freedom. So it's time America and India came together in this matter. And it's time that we unified in this to attend the problem that is on hand. Thank you so much, Adityanjee.
Thank you, Vibhuti-ji. I like this thing, excess of anything can become a poison. From a medical perspective, water is the essential element of life, but we know what happens if there is overhydration. You end up dying. So life's necessity like water. Similarly, for freedom, too much of emphasis on freedom without actually making rational choices will lead to a debacle. I went through some of the comments in the chat room. Pretty much all the questions have been touched upon or have been answered. I'm going to paraphrase one question which comes on over and over again, and any of our distinguished panelists are invited to answer that. It is from comments written by Dr. Shri Chopra. There is a perception in United States even now that Indian foreign policy establishment and Indian academia are extremely pro-Russia. Dr. Chopra has written a lot of comments, but I'm not going to go through that. I want this question to be answered by any of our panelists if they would come on the record.
Less than a minute, if you don't mind.
Sure.
And the reality of situation is that, I mean, look at the differential treatment given as far as India is concerned. Yes, there is a lot of lecturing. There's no question about it. But as far as the US itself is concerned, it regards itself as immune, a double standard. Same way, double standard between a European country and Asian country. The Philippines is a security partner, wonderful. We have heard how it's very important in choking. We know the Indian Navy is important, the Philippines are important. What happened to Scarborough Shoal? What has happened to the Philippines that are regularly being abused and challenged by Chinese boats? It's small Philippine boats that are fighting back. I don't see a single American ship in that particular situation. I mean, what about us in India? A lot of talk about sovereignty. Yes. What about our sovereignty? We lost a lot of sovereignty to Pakistan and to China, and we have still lost it. And the Chinese continue to nibble at us. So where is that sovereignty coming up? Is it sovereignty only because you're an Atlantic power or you're a European power? Don't we Asians also have a right to sovereignty? And I want to end by saying I agree with the panelists here that look, India cannot be treated as Japan or Germany as a treaty ally. We signed those treaties after modifying them. And I hope everybody will look at the modifications as an equal, with co-equal rights. And if you treat us in that way, we will certainly come with you in the same way as you treated China, at that time an impoverished country with hardly anything to recommend it. You treat it as an equal country. Look at Nixon and Kissinger and their writings. Absolutely equal. Why don't you do the same thing to a country like India, which is having the fastest rate of growth in the world, and which is a democracy, unlike China? I'm a bit surprised that this is not happening, Adityanjee.
Thank you, Professor Nalapat. You said it so eloquently that nobody else can match your, the cogence of your argument. Thank you very much indeed to our four.
Adityanjee,
Yeah.
I'll just give a 20-second answer. You can
Okay,
time
go
me
ahead.
on this.
Go ahead.
Very quickly. I agree. I'll try not to be too offensive on this, but absoluteness is never a realistic expectation. Every country has right to strategic autonomy, independent foreign policy, and keep in mind their own national interests. So India has a right to do that. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed to our four distinguished panelists, starting with Arun Ayyagari, Ramaharitha Pusarla, Professor Madhav Nalapat, and Brigadier Arun Sagal. I'm also thankful to our audience members who sacrificed 1.5 hours of their Saturday weekend time for this discussion. And lastly, I'm thankful to Team CSA, Mr. Ripudaman Pachori, Mr. Rajiv Verma, who helped me behind the scenes to make these kind of things possible. So thank you very much indeed to all of you. We shall come back again on July 27th when we'll have a distinguished lecture. My heartfelt thanks to everyone, including the members of the audience who participated in discussion, mainly Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor, Ambassador Shashank, Admiral Sinha, and Mr. Vibhuti Jha. Thank you very much indeed. Namaskar.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Namaste.
Wonderful discussion.